good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. I just want to say that, well, we all know France is a member of international organizations, is obviously a country where the rule of law, democracy, the respect of human rights are fundamental principles of the République. At the same time, France is a country with a very diverse population, coming from several backgrounds, belonging to several different linguistic, ethnic, and indeed religious and spiritual traditions. From time to time, at different levels, politicians, the judiciary, and other public entities in France defended the probably arguable right of Charlie Hebdo to insult the religious sentiment of millions of people, not just Muslims, but also the sentiment of many religious and spiritual groups in a number of occasions. All of this in the name of the right to freedom of expression. Freedom of expression, yes, is a fundamental freedom which is contained in the European Convention of Human Rights of 1950, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, which inspired the European Convention on Human Rights and a number of other international human rights instruments. But just like freedom of expression is a fundamental human right, also the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, or more broadly, the freedom of belief, is a fundamental human right protected by Article 18 of the Universal Declaration and Article 9 of the European Convention, whose extent can only be limited in compliance with the European Convention's provisions, not basing on values or needs which may be in contrast with the spirit of the human rights legislation corpus as a whole. In light of this proposed legislation, Article 9 should or could be read in conjunction with Article 2 to Protocol 1 to the European Convention on Human Rights on the right to education, which, quote, reads, "No person shall be denied the right to education in the exercise of any functions which it assumes in relation to education and teaching. The state shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions." Arguing that some groups, and specifically so-called political Islam, tend to isolate from the society, within the society, and that a legislation to prevent the activities of private entities like private schools or homeschooling, or preventing entities, new private entities, from setting up is probably, in my view, not the best answer for a democratic country like France with a very long legislative experience, if we consider that in France there is a very big corpus of law which allow to prevent and tackle extremism, terrorism, and any other forms of delinquency. So my wonder is, what is the real agenda behind the proposed legislation? Who is behind this proposed legislation? Where does it come from? Have we seen anything like this in the past, specifically in France? Well, most of us know that there is a group in France operating worldwide called the FECRIS, which is funded by the French government, which advocates all over the world the fight against minority groups, derogatorily called cults or sects in French. FECRIS doesn't really care about the international human rights obligations of France, to the point that its representatives regularly request the international organizations to ban human rights organizations advocating specifically freedom of religion and belief from their premises, and to stop interacting with them as well. The belief that behind this legislation there may be the factories, or generally speaking, those sharing the same views and philosophy, may be a possibility if we consider that very often the fight against Islam, whether political or non-political, goes hand by hand with the fight against cults. The proposed legislation may be, in my view, a Trojan horse aimed at fighting against extremism, but with the real intention to fight against minorities considered as cults. This could be just my personal opinion, conjecture, a personal speculation, if the minister, Madame Marlène Schiappa, had not stated in an interview she gave to Le Parisien as follows, quote, "We will use the same measures against the cults and against radical Islam." And as Massimo previously recalled, she even said that may be used against hundreds of groups. It is interesting to note that the bipartisan United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, in a recent report warned that FACRIS is an organization that basically treats the human rights of minorities and recommended inter alia as follows, quote, "Counter-propaganda against new religious movements by the European Federation of Research and Information Centers on Sectarianism, FACRIS, at the annual OSCE Human Dimension Conference, with information about the ongoing involvement of individuals and entities within the anti-cult movement in the suppression of religious freedom." That's a very interesting recommendation by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. To me, it is clear that the proposed legislation, if actually passed, would mean a serious drift from the international legal obligations of France, first and foremost, the European Convention on Human Rights and its fundamental freedoms and human rights obligations. The rule of law, of course, requires attention and intervention, and indeed, the extremist activities of any group must be prevented, fought against with all necessary means. But erasing the international obligations that ensure the respect of the human rights and fundamental freedoms belonging to everyone is not, in my view, the answer, but only an excuse for other ends. The present law, in my view, is also the natural consequence of law number 504 of 2001 on the prevention and suppression of cultic movements, which was also followed in 2004 by a law against religious symbols, which became very important in France. I personally hope that while we are fighting against two viruses, the COVID-19 and the virus of intolerance, the actions recommended by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom may be implemented very soon and also be only the beginning of a series of further actions to contrast these hate experts and finally guarantee the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief, while also, that's very important, guaranteeing everyone the right to freedom of expression. Thanks for your attention.